They say money can't buy happiness. But for Khloe Vance, it was the only currency that mattered. She had her sights set on the ultimate prize, a New York City CEO, a penthouse, and a life dripping in diamonds. She played her part perfectly, the irresistible siren luring Julian Croft away from his pregnant wife. Khloe thought she was writing her own fairy tale, securing her future, one secret rendezvous at a time. She never imagined that every whispered promise, every stolen kiss, and every expensive gift was just a scene in a much larger play. A play written, directed, and starring the one woman she dismissed as a casualty, the wife. And the final act was about to bring her world crashing down in the most public, most humiliating way imaginable. The view from the 80th floor penthouse was an ocean of glittering lights. Manhattan stretched below a concrete and glass kingdom, and from this vantage point, Catherine Sterling Croft was its queen. Her hand rested gently on the subtle swell of her stomach, a protective gesture that had become second nature over the past 5 months. The baby there first was a secret joy. She and her husband, Julian Croft, had nurtured a final perfect piece to complete the portrait of their enviable lives. Julian was the charismatic founder and CEO of Croft Innovations, a tech behemoth that had disrupted the logistics industry. He was the new money wunderkind, celebrated on magazine covers for his sharp mind and even sharper suits. Catherine, by contrast, was old money Grace. The Sterlings were a name synonymous with New York philanthropy and quiet, unshakable influence. Their union had been the talk of the society pages, a merger of dynamic innovation and established prestige. From the outside, it was perfect. The sprawling apartment with its curated art, the weekend trips to their estate in the Hamptons, the effortless access to a world of impossible reservations and exclusive events. Julian was attentive often, bringing home ridiculously expensive floral arrangements for no reason, or whispering how her pregnancy had only made her more beautiful. But lately the perfection had begun to feel brittle, like a flawless porcelain vase with a hairline crack invisible to the casual observer, but threatening to shatter with the slightest tremor. It started with the phone. Julian had always been attached to it, a necessary evil of his trade. But now it was an extension of his hand, angled away from her with a new subtle secrecy. Late-night strategy sessions became more frequent. Business trips to London or Tokyo were extended by a day, then 2, with rushed, staticky apologies. "Another late one, darling?" Catherine asked one Tuesday evening, her voice carefully neutral. She was arranging white peonies in a crystal vase on the marble island in their kitchen. The scent filled the sterile air, a fragrant mask for the anxiety coiling in her gut. Julian loosened his tie, dropping his briefcase by the door with a heavy thud. "You wouldn't believe it. The board is breathing down my neck about the Q3 projections. We're on the verge of a massive breakthrough, but the pressure is immense." He walked over, kissing the top of her head. His cologne, a custom blend from a perfumer in Paris, smelled faintly of sandalwood and something else, a cloying sweetness that wasn't hers, a floral note, something cheap. She forced a smile. "Well, you need to take care of yourself. And us." She patted her stomach meaningfully. His eyes softened, the guilt flickering so quickly. She might have missed it if she weren't looking for it. "Of course. You two are my world. Everything I do is for you." But the words felt rehearsed, a script he was reciting to convince himself as much as her. A week later, the first real tremor struck. Catherine was organizing their monthly receipts for their business manager, a tedious task she nonetheless performed with meticulous care. Tucked between a charge for $1,000 dinner at Per Se and a payment to Julian's tailor was a receipt from Cartier. It was for a Trinity bracelet, the interwoven bands of rose yellow and white gold. A classic. It was dated 3 weeks prior. Her heart did a slow, painful lurch. It wasn't her birthday. It wasn't their anniversary. She had certainly never received it. She called her best friend, Olivia Brent, a sharp-witted art gallery owner who had been her confidant since their days at boarding school. "Tell me I'm being a crazy, hormonal, pregnant woman," Catherine said, her voice tight after explaining the receipt. "You're pregnant, yes. Hormonal, probably. But crazy." "Not a chance," Olivia stated flatly. "Catherine, you have the best intuition of anyone I know. If you feel like something is wrong, something is wrong. Men like Julian, they live in a world of temptation. They think their success makes them invincible." "But he loves me, Liv. I know he does." "I'm sure he does," Olivia conceded gently. "But powerful men can be monumentally stupid. They compartmentalize. They think they can have the perfect wife and the bit on the side and keep the two worlds from ever colliding. What are you going to do?" Catherine looked around the silent, opulent apartment. The city lights outside seemed to mock her. "I don't know yet. I need more than a receipt. I need proof. If I accuse him and I'm wrong, I'll destroy what we have based on a feeling." "And if you're right, he's already destroying it," Olivia countered. "Be careful, Cat. Don't show your hand until you have a royal flush." The conversation solidified a cold resolve in her heart. The hurt was a deep physical ache, but beneath it the sterling steel was beginning to harden. She had not been raised to be a victim. She was a strategist, just like her father, a man who had dominated Wall Street for 40 years. She hired a private investigator, a discreet, expensive firm, recommended by her family's lawyer. She hated herself for it. It felt like a betrayal in itself, a clandestine act that sullied their marriage. But the Cartier receipt was a splinter in her mind, and she had to get it out. 2 weeks later, a plain manila envelope arrived via courier. Catherine waited until Julian had left for a weekend retreat with the board in Aspen. Her hands trembled as she sat at her rosewood desk, the city skyline, a grey, unforgiving backdrop. Inside were photographs, grainy, long-lens shots but unmistakable. Julian. He was laughing, his arm draped possessively around a young woman with fierce ambition in her eyes and a mane of artificially blonde hair. They were stepping out of a boutique hotel in Soho. In another photo, they were dining at a dimly lit table, their heads close together. In the final damning shot, the woman was lifting her wrist to admire her new piece of jewelry. The Cartier Trinity bracelet. The air left Catherine's lungs in a silent scream. The vase didn't just have a crack. It had been shattered into 1,000,000 pieces at her feet. The pain was blinding, a white-hot agony that consumed her. It wasn't just the betrayal of his body, but the casual cruelty of it. The lies whispered in their bed, the stolen moments, the gift, a symbol of trinity, of interconnectedness, given to another woman, while his wife carried their child. She wept. For hours, she let the grief wash over her, a storm of tears for the man she thought she knew and the life she believed they were building. She cried for her unborn child, who would be born into a fractured home. But as the sun began to set, casting long, mournful shadows across the room, the tears subsided. The storm passed, and in its wake there was a chilling, profound calm. The hurt was still there, a cold, heavy stone in her chest, but it was no longer her master. It was fuel. Olivia was wrong. A royal flush wasn't enough. Confronting him would lead to tearful apologies, empty promises, a messy divorce where lawyers would pick over the bones of their life. Khloe, the woman in the photos, would likely get a settlement and fade away a minor footnote in their drama. Julian might even eventually be forgiven. No. That was not justice. That was not a solution. It was a concession. A simple divorce was a release. What Julian and that woman deserved was a lesson, a reckoning, a meticulously crafted, perfectly executed ruin that would not only end their affair, but would dismantle the very foundation of the mistress's ambition and force Julian to confront the chasm of his own weakness. She picked up her phone, her hand steady now. She didn't call a lawyer. She called the one person in the world she knew would understand the need for something more than just revenge. The one person who would relish the game. Her brother, Marcus Sterling. "Marcus," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "I need your help. It's about Julian, and I have a plan." Khloe Vance believed in manifestation. Not the gentle yoga and incense kind, but a ruthless, focused targeting of desire. And her desire had a name, the 1%. From her cramped studio apartment in Bushwick, a stark contrast to the world she craved, she would scroll through Instagram and Forbes, studying the habitats and habits of the ultra-rich. She saw herself not as an outsider looking in, but as a predator studying her prey. Her friend Zara, who worked as a bottle service girl in a meat-packing district club, was her co-conspirator and enabler. "Look, Khloe," Zara had said, perched on the edge of Khloe's bed and filing her acrylic nails. "You're gorgeous, you're smart, and you're hungry. Don't waste that on some broke artist who thinks sharing an Uber is splurging. You're built for better things. You just need the right launchpad." Khloe couldn't agree more. She'd worked for 2 years as a junior marketing associate at a stodgy second-tier tech firm, watching men with half her wit and a tenth of her drive get promoted because they'd gone to the right schools or played golf with the right people. She saw the system was rigged, so she'd decided to rig it back in her favor. Marriage, she concluded, was the fastest, most effective merger and acquisition a woman like her could execute. Julian Croft became her target by design. She'd read a feature on him in Wired magazine detailing his meteoric rise. He was brilliant, driven, and most importantly married to a woman who seemed in Khloe's estimation to be a boring old money placeholder. Catherine Sterling Croft was beautiful in a classical, understated way, but she lacked the fire, the edge that Khloe cultivated. She was a museum piece. Khloe was a living flame. Khloe engineered their first meeting with the precision of a military campaign. She learned from a disgruntled ex-employee on LinkedIn that Julian often went for a solitary drink at the Aviary, a high-end cocktail bar in Columbus Circle, to decompress after a tough week. She chose her armor carefully, a silk slip dress that was just a little too daring for the venue heels that made her legs look endless, and a perfume, a heady, almost aggressive gardenia scent that was impossible to ignore. She sat at the bar, nursing a single expensive cocktail, and waited. When Julian walked in, looking weary and powerful, she accidentally caught his eye and gave him a small conspiratorial smile. As he sat a few stools down, she pretended to be engrossed in a book, ironically, a biography of Napoleon. It took him less than 10 minutes. "That looks like heavy reading for a Friday night," he said, his voice as smooth as the aged whiskey the bartender was pouring for him. Khloe looked up, feigning surprise. I find it's best to learn from those who knew how to conquer the world. She closed the book, her fingers tracing the title. Khloe Vance, she said, extending a hand. Her nails were immaculate, painted a deep predatory red. Julian Croft. I know, she said with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Everyone in the tech world knows who you are. The hook was in. He was flattered. Over the next hour, she played him like a virtuoso. She was impressed by his work, but not starstruck. She challenged his opinions on market trends, showing she was more than just a pretty face. She listened intently, her gaze never wavering, making him feel like the only man in the universe. She was a perfect cocktail of intellect, beauty, and unabashed admiration. She never mentioned his wife. When he glanced at his wedding ring, a solid platinum band, she simply let her eyes follow his. A flicker of something disappointment, understanding passing through them before she smiled and changed the subject. She was planting a seed she doesn't judge, she understands. He walked her to the curb to get a taxi. I shouldn't, he said, the internal conflict clear on his face. But I'd love to continue this conversation. I'm not a home wrecker, Julian, she said softly, placing a hand on his arm. Her touch was electric. But I'm also not blind. I see a man who isn't being celebrated. If you ever want to talk to someone who gets it, you have my number. She had already written it on a napkin and slipped it into his suit pocket when he wasn't looking. It was a bold, presumptive move, and it paid off. He texted her the next day. Their affair escalated quickly from discreet lunches in out-of-the-way bistros to afternoons in the sterile luxury of a suite at the Greenwich Hotel. Khloe was everything Catherine wasn't. Where Catherine was calm, Khloe was fiery. Where Catherine's world was one of quiet legacy, Khloe's was one of fierce, palpable ambition. She made Julian feel like a king, a conqueror, not just a husband. She doesn't understand the pressure you're under, Khloe would murmur, tracing the lines of his jaw as they lay in the post-coital tangle of hotel sheets. Her money was inherited. Yours is earned. It's different. It's real. She was an expert at identifying his insecurities and soothing them. She praised his riskiest business decisions, validated his frustrations with his board of directors, and made him feel seen in a way he hadn't in years. She was the ultimate cheerleader for the cult of Julian Croft, and he in turn showered her with gifts. It started small, a bouquet of exotic orchids delivered to her apartment, a first-edition book she'd mentioned. Then it escalated. A shopping spree on Fifth Avenue, a weekend in Miami on a business trip, and then the Cartier bracelet. He presented it to her in their hotel room. The famous red box sat on the pillow. Khloe's heart hammered in her chest. This was it. This was the moment a man transitions a woman from a dalliance to an investment. Julian, it's beautiful. She breathed her performance of awe-struck gratitude. Pitch perfect. She allowed a single tear to trace a path down her cheek. But you shouldn't have. I wanted it to, he said, his voice thick with a mixture of desire and guilt. You deserve beautiful things. As he fastened the cool gold around her wrist, she looked at her reflection in the mirror. The bracelet was a shackle of a different kind, one of victory. She had him. The CEO was hers. She thought of his pregnant wife somewhere in their palatial penthouse, probably arranging flowers or planning a nursery, blissfully unaware. Khloe felt a flash of pity, quickly replaced by a surge of triumph. The woman hadn't fought for her man. She had grown complacent, secure in her position, and had left the door wide open for someone like Khloe to walk right in. What are you thinking about? Julian asked, kissing her shoulder. Khloe met his eyes in the mirror, her expression a carefully constructed mask of adoration. "I'm thinking," she said, her voice a seductive whisper, "that I'm the luckiest woman in the world." She was playing the long game. The bracelet was a down payment. The end goal was the full buyout. His name, his fortune, his life. The pregnant wife was a temporary obstacle, one that Khloe was confident would soon be removed. She had studied her target, laid her trap, and secured her prize. She was the serpent in their Eden, and she had just convinced Adam to take the first bite. She was so focused on the apple, she never once thought to look up and see God watching. The days following the arrival of the investigator's report were a masterclass in composure for Catherine. On the surface, nothing changed. She continued her work with the Sterling Family Foundation, attended her prenatal yoga classes, and discussed nursery color palettes with an interior designer. She greeted Julian with a serene smile when he returned from his board retreat, a weekend he'd spent with Khloe in a luxury ski lodge, according to the PI's follow-up email. She listened to his stories of high-altitude negotiations, her heart a frozen stone in her chest. Each lie he told was another brick in the wall she was building around it. Her grief, once a raging inferno, had been banked and forged into something cold, sharp, and patient. This was no longer about a broken heart. It was about protecting her legacy and her child's future from the collateral damage of Julian's weakness and his mistress's greed. Her brother Marcus Sterling arrived at the penthouse 2 days after her call. He was Catherine's opposite in many ways. While she was composed and classical, Marcus was a whirlwind of creative energy and roguish charm. He'd flirted with acting in his 20s, much to their father's chagrin, before finding his niche in venture capitalism, backing boutique hotels and eccentric art projects. He had a chameleon's ability to adapt to any situation and an actor's love for a dramatic role. Most importantly, he was fiercely loyal to his sister. He found her in the library, the damning photos spread across the antique desk. He looked at them, his jaw tightening, then at his sister's pale, determined face. "I could have him ruined on Wall Street by morning," Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. A few calls, a few whispered rumors about instability at Croft Innovations. His stock would plummet. Catherine shook her head, pushing the photos into a neat pile. "No, that hurts me. It hurts the baby. And it's too simple. Julian's crime isn't just infidelity, it's arrogance. He thinks he's untouchable. And this woman..." She gestured to the image of Khloe laughing and radiant with Julian's stolen affection. "Her crime is ambition. She doesn't want Julian. She wants what he represents. A key to a kingdom she feels entitled to." So we don't destroy the kingdom," Catherine said, her eyes gleaming with a cold, intelligent light. "We present her with a bigger one. We make her believe she's trading up. We make her discard Julian like he's last season's handbag." Marcus leaned back, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. He recognized the look in his sister's eyes. It was the same look their father got before a hostile takeover. "Oh, this is much better than my idea. You want to humiliate them both. You want to make him feel the sting of being tossed aside for a better offer. And you want to strip her of everything when she reaches for it. This is diabolical. I love it. Tell me the plan." For the next 4 hours they plotted. It was a creative, exhilarating process, a dark storm of ingenuity that pushed Catherine's pain into the background. They were no longer the victim and the avenger. They were architects. The cornerstone of their plan was a new character, Sebastian Thorne. "He needs to be everything Julian is, but more," Catherine dictated, pacing back and forth. If Julian is a millionaire, Sebastian is a billionaire. If Julian has a penthouse, Sebastian has a private island. If Julian flies first class, Sebastian owns the jet. Marcus, a natural performer, was already getting into character. "He's not American," he declared. "Too easy to check. He's European, old family, but he made his own fortune. Media shy, a recluse. No social media footprint to speak of, which makes him mysterious and impossible to Google stalk effectively." They built Sebastian Thorne from the ground up. He was the heir to a defunct German industrial fortune who had brilliantly reinvested in rare earth minerals and private space exploration. His company, Thorne Global, was based in Zurich, with satellite offices in Hong Kong and London. He was in New York for a few months to quietly explore new investment opportunities. "We need to create a legend," Marcus said, scribbling notes on a legal pad. "He needs to be seen in the right places, but only briefly. A flash of impossible wealth." They began to choreograph the operation. Phase 1. The sighting. Marcus as Sebastian would start appearing at the periphery of the high-end world. He'd attend a Christie's auction and outbid a known hedge fund manager for a piece of modern art. He'd be seen dining at Daniel, but in the private skybox, a privilege reserved for a select few. He wouldn't interact. He would only be observed. Whispers would start. Who is that man? Phase 2, the lure. They needed to get Sebastian and Khloe in the same room. Olivia, Catherine's art gallery owner friend, was brought into the circle of trust. Her upcoming gallery opening, showcasing a trendy new photographer, was the perfect venue. Khloe, eager to be seen as a patron of the arts and to elevate her social standing, would undoubtedly be there on Julian's arm. "That's where Sebastian will make his first move," Catherine planned. "Subtle. He'll admire the same piece of art she's looking at. He'll make a quiet, insightful comment. He won't try to pick her up. He'll just plant a seed of intrigue." Phase 3. The escalation. This was the core of the honey trap. Sebastian would orchestrate a series of chance encounters. He would overwhelm Khloe not with crude displays of cash, but with a level of sophistication and access that would make Julian's world seem provincial. He wouldn't just send flowers. He'd send a rare orchid that was flown in that morning from Costa Rica with a simple handwritten note in German. He wouldn't offer a shopping spree. He'd mention he was flying to Milan for a suit fitting and casually ask if she'd like to join him. "We need to make Julian look like the minor leagues." Marcus grinned, the thrill of the performance dancing in his eyes. "We need her to see Julian as a stepping stone she's outgrown." Phase 4. The trap. The final act would take place at the Sterling Family Foundation's annual charity gala. It was the pinnacle of the New York social calendar, an event Khloe would be desperate to attend as a sign of her arrival. By then, Catherine calculated Khloe would have left Julian and would be expecting to make her grand debut on the arm of the elusive billionaire Sebastian Thorne. That's where the curtain would fall. To make Sebastian Thorne real, they spared no expense. Marcus was given a new wardrobe of bespoke suits, a Patek Philippe watch from the family vault, and a black Amex card with no conceivable limit. They rented a black Maybach with a driver. They even had their tech team create a shell website for Thorne Global, a single elegant landing page with a login portal and the words discretion, vision, power. As they finalized the details, Marcus looked at his sister with a newfound respect. The fragile, heartbroken woman was gone. In her place was a general commanding an army. "Are you sure about this cat?" he asked quietly, the game momentarily forgotten. "Once this starts, there's no going back. For you and Julian either." Catherine looked out at the city lights, her reflection, a pale ghost in the glass. Her hand went to her belly. Julian and I, as we were. That ended the moment he gave another woman that bracelet. I'm not destroying my marriage, Marcus. I'm discovering what's left of it, and I'm protecting my child's birthright from a predator. This isn't just revenge on her. It's a test for him. Let's see how he reacts when the worm turns. Let's see what he's made of when he's the one who gets thrown away. Her voice was as cut and clear as ice. The plan was in motion. The architect had drawn the blueprints. Now it was time to start building the trap. The trap was baited at Olivia Brent's gallery, opening in Chelsea. The cavernous, white space buzzed with the city's self-appointed cultural elite. Champagne flowed and the air crackled with networking and air kisses. Khloe arrived, clinging to Julian's arm like a trophy. She was wearing a crimson dress that was a shade too loud for the minimalist art on the walls, a deliberate choice to ensure she stood out. She surveyed the room with the keen eye of a hawk cataloguing the influential faces, desperate to be seen to be included. Julian looked distracted. A man pulled in two directions. He introduced Khloe to a few acquaintances, with a forced casualness that didn't go unnoticed, referring to her as a marketing consultant. The lie hung awkwardly in the air. Catherine had prepared Marcus meticulously. Don't approach her directly, she'd instructed. Let her see you. Let her feel your presence before you ever say a word. Marcus, in his persona as Sebastian Thorne, was a masterpiece of understated power. He wore a dark, tailored suit with no tie, a look of effortless European elegance. He didn't mingle. He stood alone near a large, dramatic photograph of a stormy sea, a glass of mineral water in his hand, observing the scene with a look of detached amusement. He radiated an aura of such profound self-assurance that he created his own gravitational pull. People noticed him. They whispered. Khloe noticed him. While Julian was cornered by a tech journalist, she found her eyes drifting to the mysterious stranger. He was handsome, but more than that, he was intriguing. He wasn't working the room. He was above it. As she moved to get a fresh glass of champagne, she found herself standing near the same photograph he was observing. It's powerful, isn't it? A deep voice with a faint, unplaceable European accent said beside her. She turned. It was him. Up close, his presence was even more formidable. It is, she managed her voice a little breathless. It feels chaotic and beautiful at the same time. A perfect metaphor for life, he said, his eyes scanning the photograph, not her. It's by a German artist I collect. He manages to capture the sublime terror of nature. Most people just see a pretty picture of a wave. He finally turned his gaze to her, and his eyes, a startlingly clear blue, seemed to look right through her. You don't strike me as someone who just sees the pretty picture. Khloe felt a jolt. He wasn't just complimenting her looks, he was complimenting her perception. It was a far more sophisticated line than any she had heard before. I try not to be, she said, her voice dropping to a more intimate register. I am Sebastian, he said, giving a slight bow of his head instead of offering a hand, a deliberately formal old-world gesture. Khloe, she replied. Before she could say more, Julian reappeared at her side. Everything okay? He asked, his arm sliding possessively around her waist. He eyed Sebastian with a flicker of territorial suspicion. Sebastian gave Julian a dismissive glance, a micro-expression of such profound disinterest that it was more insulting than any glare. Enjoy the evening, he said to Khloe, and then he simply turned and walked away, melting into the crowd. The seed was planted. Over the next 2 weeks, Sebastian Thorne executed Phase 3 with surgical precision. The encounters were always seemingly by chance, yet perfectly engineered to showcase the chasm between Julian's wealth and Sebastian's. One afternoon, as Khloe was having lunch with her friend Zara at an outdoor cafe in Soho, a sleek black Maybach purred to a stop at the curb. The driver opened the door, and Sebastian Thorne emerged. He spotted Khloe, and a slow smile spread across his face. He came over to their table. "Miss Vance, a pleasure to see you again," he said. Zara was staring, her jaw practically on the table. He didn't stay long. He was on his way to a meeting, something about geothermal prospecting in Iceland. He dropped the phrase so casually, it was like someone else mentioning a trip to the grocery store. Before leaving, he looked at the wilted rose in the small vase on their table. The next morning, the reception desk at Khloe's marketing firm called her. A delivery had arrived. It was a breathtaking arrangement of black baccarat roses, so dark they were almost velvet, with a simple card. These seemed more fitting. There was no phone number, no desperate plea for a date, just a gesture of overwhelming, mysterious elegance. Julian had sent her roses the week before, a standard dozen red ones that now seemed pathetic by comparison. The final decisive blow came a week later. Khloe was complaining to Julian over dinner about her frustration with her job. "They're so small-minded, Julian. I have ideas that could revolutionize their entire strategy, but they won't listen." "It takes time to climb the ladder, honey," Julian had said a touch condescendingly. The very next day, a courier delivered a thick envelope to her office. Inside was a first-class ticket to Milan on a private charter dated for the upcoming weekend. The note was brief. "I'm told the finest business armor is forged in Italy. I have a fitting with my tailor Brioni. I've taken the liberty of arranging a consultation for you as well. A mind like yours deserves a wardrobe to match. A car will be at your apartment on Saturday morning. It is, of course, entirely your choice." This was it. This was the checkmate move. It wasn't just a gift. It was a challenge. It was an invitation into a world Julian Croft, for all his millions, couldn't access. The world of private jets, bespoke Italian suits, and casual globe-trotting power. She looked at the Cartier bracelet on her wrist. A few weeks ago, it had felt like the ultimate prize. Now it felt like a trinket, a consolation prize from the minor leagues. Her decision was swift and brutal. She broke up with Julian that night in his car after he'd taken her to dinner. He was talking about a potential site for a new distribution center in New Jersey. His world suddenly seemed so small, so domestic. "Julian, I don't think this is working," she said, her voice cool and practiced. He was stunned. "What are you talking about? We were just in Miami. I bought you—" "This isn't about what you can buy me," she lied, cutting him off. "It's about ambition. I need to be with someone who is bigger, who sees the whole world as a chessboard, not just a single market sector. I think you've gotten comfortable. I haven't." The words were chosen to wound his ego, the most vulnerable part of any man like him. He was speechless. He, Julian Croft, the tech titan, being told he wasn't ambitious enough. By the woman he had risked his marriage for. The irony was lost on him, submerged in the sting of rejection. "Is there someone else?" he finally asked, his voice tight with wounded pride. Khloe gave him a pitying look. "Don't be ridiculous," she said, leaving the question hanging just enough to be a yes. "I just think we want different things. I wish you the best, Julian. Truly. She got out of the car and walked away without looking back, leaving him sitting in the stunned, humiliated silence. She felt a pang of something. Not guilt, but perhaps the thrill of the kill. She had discarded a CEO. She was on her way to bigger things. Back in her apartment, she packed. She looked at the ticket to Milan, her heart pounding with triumphant anticipation. She was Khloe Vance, and she was about to be outfitted in the armor of a queen, ready to take her place beside a true king. She had played the game and won. The invitation to the Sterling Foundation gala had arrived in the mail that day, a thick, creamy card with embossed lettering. She had initially planned to pressure Julian into taking her. Now she would arrive with Sebastian Thorne. It would be her true coronation. She imagined the look on the face of Julian's mousy, pregnant wife when she saw who had replaced her. It was all falling into place more perfectly than she could have ever imagined. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a symphony of opulence. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto a sea of New York's most powerful and influential figures. The theme of the Sterling Family Foundation Gala was Foundations for the Future, a celebration of the charity's work in funding education for underprivileged children. For the guests, however, it was the ultimate arena for showcasing status and wealth. Khloe Vance made her entrance feeling like she had finally arrived at the center of the universe. She wore a gown of liquid silver, a custom piece she'd acquired in Milan on her whirlwind trip with Sebastian. It clung to her every curve, audacious and dazzling. On her arm, however, was not the billionaire she expected. Sebastian had called her that afternoon, his voice a smooth apology. A sudden, unavoidable crisis with his Zurich office. A satellite launch had experienced a minor orbital deviation. The words were so fantastically important, so far beyond the scope of normal life, that she couldn't possibly be upset. "I will be there, my dear, I promise," he'd said. "But I will be late. Please go ahead. My driver will take you. I want you to make your entrance. You will be the most radiant woman in the room. I will find you the moment I arrive." So she had arrived alone, a move that was in itself a statement of confidence. She walked in, not as a +1, but as a woman who belonged. She could already feel the whispers, see the curious glances. Who is she? The story she would tell that she was waiting for. Sebastian Thorne would only add to her mystique. Her eyes scanned the room. Searching. She saw Julian almost immediately. He was standing near the bar, looking drawn and haggard, nursing a scotch. He saw her, and his face tightened with a mixture of pain and anger. Khloe met his gaze for a moment, giving him a small, pitying smile before turning away. The satisfaction was exquisite. Then she saw her. Catherine Sterling Croft was standing at the center of a small group, the undeniable focal point of the room. She was not in a flashy gown, but an elegant, deep blue velvet dress that fell gracefully over her pregnant form. Diamonds glittered at her throat and ears, the kind of quiet, heavy jewels that are passed down through generations, not bought on a whim. She wasn't trying to be the center of attention. She simply was. She radiated a serene, unshakable power that made Khloe's silver dress suddenly feel cheap and desperate. The two women's eyes met across the crowded room. Catherine offered a polite, enigmatic smile, a queen acknowledging a courtier. Determined to seize the moment, Khloe began to circulate, dropping Sebastian's name into conversations with calculated nonchalance. "Oh, this old thing. she'd say of her dress. "Sebastian insisted I have it made in Milan." Or, "Sebastian is hoping to make it, he's just dealing with a minor orbital deviation with one of his satellites." The reactions were a mixture of awe and confusion, which was exactly what she wanted. An hour into the event, a hush fell over the room as Catherine took to the stage to give the welcome address. She spoke eloquently about the Foundation's mission, her voice calm and clear. "We build foundations for children," she said, her eyes sweeping the room. "But we must also be vigilant about the foundations of our own lives. We must ensure they are built on trust, integrity, and truth. Because when those foundations are weak, everything built upon them is at risk of collapse." The words seemed to hang in the air, freighted with a meaning that only a few people in the room could begin to grasp. Julian shifted uncomfortably. Khloe felt a prickle of unease. After her speech, Catherine descended the stage and began to move through the room. Khloe watched her, a predator sizing up her rival. She decided now was the time. She would go over, introduce herself, and deliver the final killing blow, the casual mention of her new superior benefactor. But before she could move, Catherine was walking directly toward her. "Miss Vance," Catherine said, her voice smooth as silk. "I'm Catherine Croft. I don't believe we've been formally introduced." Khloe was momentarily thrown. She had expected to be the one in control of this encounter. "It's a pleasure," Khloe said, recovering quickly. "Your speech was very moving." "Thank you," Catherine replied, her eyes holding Khloe's. "I saw you come in alone. Are you waiting for someone?" This was the opening. "I'm actually," Khloe said, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. "Sebastian Thorne. I'm not sure if you know him. He's quite private." Catherine's smile widened. "Sebastian Thorne," she repeated, tasting the name. "Yes, I know him very well. In fact, he's just arrived." Khloe's heart leapt. She turned her eyes, scanning the grand entrance, expecting to see the handsome, powerful man who was about to solidify her new life. "Allow me to make the introduction," Catherine said, and raised a hand. From the crowd, a man emerged, walking toward them. But it wasn't the suave European billionaire. It was Marcus Sterling, Catherine's brother. He was wearing the same bespoke suit and the Patek Philippe watch, but his expression was different. The cool detachment was gone, replaced by a look of wry, theatrical amusement. Khloe stared, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. "You're—" "Her brother," Marcus said, gesturing to Catherine. "Marcus Sterling, at your service." He gave a mocking bow. "Though for the past few weeks you've known me as Sebastian." The blood drained from Khloe's face. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. The murmurs around them, which had been a gentle buzz, were now a roaring in her ears. She looked from Marcus's smirking face to Catherine's calm, victorious expression. I don't understand." Khloe stammered, the words catching in her throat. "I think you do," Catherine said, her voice dropping to a cold, precise whisper, meant only for Khloe. "You thought you found a bigger fish. You thought you could discard my husband because you'd found a billionaire. But the billionaire was a fantasy, a story, one we wrote just for you." Khloe's eyes darted around. People were staring openly now, their phones half raised. She saw Olivia Brent standing nearby, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. She saw Julian frozen by the bar, his face a mask of dawning abject horror as he finally understood the full scope of what was happening. He wasn't just a cheated-on husband. He was a pawn in his wife's brutal, intricate game of revenge. He had been discarded and humiliated by Khloe, only to discover that his own wife had orchestrated the entire thing. "Every chance meeting," Marcus explained, enjoying his monologue. "Every gift, every flight. Every word I said to you was a line in a script written by my sister. You're not a gold digger, Khloe. You're just a fool. You fell for the oldest trick in the book, your own greed. The humiliation was a physical force pressing in on her, stealing the air from her lungs. The silver dress felt like a suit of armor that had just been melted onto her skin. Her grand entrance had become a public execution. My husband was weak, Catherine said, her voice cutting through Khloe's shock. And you are predatory. You both deserved a lesson in consequences. You, Miss Vance, wanted a foundation of wealth. Instead, you'll be a cautionary tale. And my husband. She glanced over at Julian, her eyes like chips of ice, has learned what it feels like to be deemed not enough. Khloe stood there, stripped bare, in the center of the glittering ballroom. The life she had fantasized about, the victory, she had tasted all of it, was a lie, a carefully constructed stage, and she was the only one who hadn't known she was an actor in a tragedy. She turned and fled, pushing through the crowd of stunned, whispering faces, the sound of their judgment chasing her out into the cold New York night. Catherine watched her go, her expression unreadable. She had not raised her voice. She had not cried. She had simply taken a predator, a problem, and dismantled it with the cold, quiet efficiency of a bomb disposal expert. She then turned her gaze back to her husband, who stood pale and broken across the room. The first part of her plan was complete. The second was about to begin. The aftermath of the gala was a bloodbath in the gossip columns and social media feeds. The story was too delicious to ignore the ambitious mistress, the fake billionaire, and the brilliant pregnant wife who had orchestrated the most elaborate revenge plot New York society had ever seen. The Sterling Gambit, one blog dubbed it. Khloe Vance became an overnight pariah. Her name, her face, her carefully curated ambition, all were now punchlines. She was fired from her marketing job for conduct unbecoming of the company's image. Her landlord started eviction proceedings. The friends who had cheered on her gold-digging like Zara vanished as if they'd never existed. Khloe was erased, a ghost haunting the city she had tried to conquer. But for Catherine, the public humiliation of her rival was only the first step. The true test, the real reconstruction, had to happen within the silent, opulent walls of their penthouse. Julian came home that night, or rather in the early hours of the morning, a broken man. The arrogance had been flayed from him, leaving behind a raw, quivering shame. He found Catherine in the living room, sitting in an armchair, bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp. The city lights twinkled behind her, oblivious. He started with the usual script. The apologies, the pleas, the self-flagellation. Catherine, I am so sorry. I was a fool, an idiot. I don't know what I was thinking. I love you. I love our baby. Please, please forgive me. The words tumbled out, desperate and rehearsed. Catherine listened patiently, her hands resting on her stomach. She let him exhaust himself, let the silence fall after his pathetic monologue. When she finally spoke, her voice was not angry. It was not hurt. It was the calm, measured voice of a CEO outlining the terms of a merger, and it terrified him more than any shouting match could have. Stop, she said simply. The word cut through his pleading. Your apology is irrelevant right now. It's a reflex. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry you were made to look like a fool. The kind of sorrow that matters, the kind that leads to change, takes time to cultivate. You haven't had that time. What do you want me to do? He whispered, his voice cracking. I'll do anything. I know you will, she said. Because you're cornered. What I want is not for you to do anything. What I want is for you to understand why I did what I did." She stood up and walked to the window looking out over their kingdom. This wasn't just about punishing that woman, Julian. This was about you. You have a fundamental weakness. It's your ego. It needs constant validation. And when you felt the slightest bit neglected or bored, you sought it elsewhere. You didn't just have an affair. You risked everything. Our family, our future, the stability this child deserves for a cheap thrill and an ego boost. She turned back to him. "I could have divorced you. I could have taken half of your company and walked away. My family would have supported me. But that felt insufficient. Because the problem, your weakness, would remain. You would just find another woman and another, and our child would grow up with a father who was a revolving door of indiscretions." She walked to the desk and picked up a thick folder of documents her lawyer had drawn up that week. She placed it on the coffee table between them. "So this is what is going to happen. This is not a negotiation." He looked at the folder as if it were a bomb. "This is a post-nuptial agreement," she explained. "It transfers 60% of your shares in Croft Innovations, along with a controlling interest in our joint liquid assets, into a trust. A trust for our child of which I am the sole trustee until they come of age. You will retain your title as CEO. You will still draw your salary. But your decision-making power in the company and in our finances is now shared. I will have a permanent seat on the board. Your personal spending will be subject to review. We will be partners in the truest sense of the word, Julian. Your kingdom is no longer solely yours." He stared at her aghast. This was more than punishment. This was a coup, a complete restructuring of their entire existence. "You're taking my company," he breathed. "No," she corrected him calmly. "I am protecting our family's primary asset. You proved you were a poor steward, that you could be compromised. So I am installing a new system of checks and balances. Think of me as your personal board of directors." He saw the checkmate. If he refused, she would divorce him, and the ensuing scandal, combined with the loss of the Sterling family's backing and connections, would gut the company anyway. He would lose her his child and a massive chunk of his fortune. Her plan gave him a path, however narrow and humbling, to keep all three. "And us?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What happens to us? We will stay married," Catherine said. "Our child will be born with a father and a mother under the same roof. You will sleep in the guest room. You will attend counseling. You will work every single day to earn back a fraction of the trust you shattered. Forgiveness is not on the table. It is not something I can give you right now. But you may in time earn the right to ask for it again." She laid out the new foundation of their life built upon the ashes of the old one. There was no passion in her voice, only purpose. She had seen the crack in their gilded cage, and instead of trying to patch it, she had torn it down and was now building a fortress in its place. A fortress to protect her child. Julian Croft, the tech visionary. The master of his universe finally understood true power. It wasn't in flashy deals or public acclaim. It was in the quiet, unyielding resolve of the woman standing before him. He had mistaken her grace for weakness, her composure for complacency. He now saw it for what it was, the calm surface of a deep and formidable ocean. He picked up a pen, his hand shaking, and signed the documents. He signed away control of the empire he had built, handing the keys to the woman he had betrayed. It was the end of his reign, and for Catherine and the child she carried, it was the beginning of a new, unshakable dynasty, founded not on a naive belief in love, but on the cold, hard certainty of control. Their future would not be a fairy tale, but it would be secure. And in their world, that was the only happily ever after that truly mattered. And there you have it, a story not just of infidelity, but of breathtaking strategy and icy revenge. Catherine Croft proves that the most dangerous woman is not the one who screams and throws plates, but the one who smiles, waits and dismantles her enemies with the precision of a chess grandmaster. She didn't just get even. She rewrote the rules of the entire game, securing her child's future and putting her husband firmly in his place. What did you think of her plan? Was it brilliant justice or a step too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. A missed appointment, a single photograph. That's all it took to shatter a picture-perfect life. For Olivia, it was the day of her baby's first ultrasound, a day her billionaire husband Richard swore he wouldn't miss. But while she was alone in that cold, sterile room, he was somewhere else entirely. He was on a sun-drenched beach, his arm wrapped not around his pregnant wife, but around a woman the world would soon know. He thought his secrets were safe, buried under piles of money. He had no idea he was married to a woman who was about to make him headline news. The silence in the ultrasound room was a living thing. It was a cold, clinical hum that seemed to amplify the frantic thumping of Olivia's own heart. She stared at the large monitor, a blank grey screen that held the promise of her future, a future she was supposed to be sharing. Her hand, trembling slightly, rested on the curve of her stomach. 4 months. 4 months of morning sickness, of strange cravings, and of a burgeoning love so fierce it almost frightened her. He's just running a little late, I'm sure. Dr. Evans said, her voice a practiced, soothing melody that did nothing to calm the storm in Olivia's chest. Richard is a busy man. Olivia forced a smile, a brittle thing that felt like it might crack her face. Yes, always busy. She had repeated that phrase so many times, it had become a mantra, an excuse, a shield. Richard Sterling, the real estate mogul, the darling of Wall Street, the man whose face was plastered on the cover of Forbes, was always busy. His time was measured in millions of dollars, in deals that shaped the city's skyline. She knew that. She had accepted that. But today was supposed to be different. He had promised. Live my love, he'd said just last night, his voice a low, intoxicating rumble as he traced the line of her jaw. Nothing in this world would make me miss seeing our baby for the first time. I'll move mountains. I'll reschedule the mare. That's our moment. His words, like everything else about him, had been perfect. Richard was a master architect, not just of buildings, but of moments. Their life together was a carefully constructed masterpiece of glamour and romance. Spontaneous trips to Paris on his private jet, front row seats at New York Fashion Week, whispered sweet nothings over candlelit dinners at restaurants, so exclusive they didn't have names. He had swept into her life a whirlwind of charm and power, and she, a quiet, unassuming librarian, had been caught up in the storm, dizzy with a happiness she'd never imagined possible. But lately the perfection had started to feel fragile. There were the hushed phone calls he would take in the other room, the sudden business trips that seemed to pop up with alarming frequency. When she'd asked, he'd smiled, that disarming smile of his, the one that made her feel silly and paranoid. Just putting out fires, my love. The price of success, And she had believed him. She wanted to believe him. An hour passed. The grey screen remained blank. Dr. Evans, her professional patience wearing thin, suggested they reschedule. Olivia felt a hot flush of shame. The other women in the waiting room with their proud, beaming partners had glanced at her with a mixture of pity and curiosity. The pregnant wife of the billionaire, all alone. "No, let's just do it," Olivia said, her voice barely a whisper. She couldn't bear the thought of coming back, of reliving this humiliation. She needed to see her baby. She needed to know that one thing at least was real. The cold gel on her stomach was a shock. She flinched as Dr. Evans moved the transducer. And then it happened. A flicker on the screen. A tiny, pulsating shape. A sound filled the room. A rhythmic, powerful whooshing that was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. "There's the heartbeat," Dr. Evans said, her voice softening with genuine warmth. "Strong and steady. Congratulations, Olivia. You have a very healthy baby." Tears streamed down Olivia's face, hot and silent. It was a girl, her daughter. In that moment, the ache of Richard's absence was a sharp, physical pain, a gaping wound in what should have been a perfect memory. She took the grainy, black-and-white photos, her fingers caressing the image of the tiny life inside her. She sent him a text. "We saw her today. She's perfect." The reply came hours later, a terse, impersonal message. "Knew she would be. So sorry, Liv. Got dragged into an emergency meeting with investors from Dubai. Still locked in. We'll make it up to you, I promise." The disappointment was a bitter pill. She tried to swallow it to be the understanding wife she had always been. She drew a bath in their palatial penthouse apartment, the city lights twinkling below like a carpet of fallen stars. She tried to focus on the joy on the little girl who was now her entire world, but the unease lingered, a shadow she couldn't shake. It was that night, as she mindlessly scrolled through her phone, a habit she'd picked up to fill the long, lonely evenings, that the shadow took form. It started as a knot in her stomach, a prickle of dread. Her friend Maya had sent her a link to a popular Instagram gossip account, one that chronicled the lives of the rich and shameless. The caption was innocuous. "Another day in paradise." But the picture stole the air from her lungs. It was a selfie, a sun-drenched, carefree selfie taken on a pristine white sand beach. In the foreground, a woman with a mane of platinum blonde hair and a predatory smile pouted at the camera. Her name was Khloe Vanderbilt, a socialite and so-called influencer whose manufactured life was a constant source of tabloid fodder. But it wasn't Khloe's face that made Olivia's world tilt on its axis. It was the man beside her. He was shirtless, his skin bronzed, a pair of expensive sunglasses perched on his head. His arm was wrapped possessively around Khloe's waist, his hand splayed possessively on her hip. He was smiling a wide, genuine, unguarded smile that Olivia hadn't seen in months. It was Richard. The phone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering onto the marble floor. The emergency meeting with Dubai investors. The city skyline behind him wasn't Dubai. It wasn't even New York. It was the unmistakable turquoise water and lush green hills of St. Bart's. The lie was so audacious, so brazen, it was almost comical. He hadn't just missed the most important day of her life. He had been with another woman. He had posted the evidence for the world to see, a digital middle finger to her and their unborn child. The heartbreak was a tidal wave, a crushing force that left her gasping for breath. But as the initial shock subsided, something else began to bubble up from the depths of her despair. It was a cold, hard fury, an emotion so intense it burned away the tears. He had underestimated her. He had seen her as a quiet, compliant accessory to his perfect life. He had never bothered to look deeper to see the steel beneath the silk. He thought he could break her heart and walk away unscathed. That night, lying alone in their king-sized bed, the city lights mocking her with their cold, indifferent beauty, Olivia made a promise to herself and to the tiny, sleeping life inside her. Richard Sterling wanted to be famous. He loved the spotlight. Well, she was about to give him the performance of a lifetime. He didn't know it yet, but he had just become the star of a new story, and she would be the one writing the headlines. The first 24 hours were a blur of managed hysteria. Olivia moved through the opulent emptiness of the penthouse like a ghost, her every action mechanical. She made coffee she didn't drink. She stared out at the panoramic view of Central Park without seeing it. The picture on her phone was a brand on her mind, seared into her memory with the heat of betrayal. Richard, Khloe, St. Bart's, her husband, the man who had vowed to cherish her, was a liar, and not just a simple liar, but one of breathtaking arrogance. The sheer audacity of it was what kept replaying in her mind. He hadn't even bothered to be discreet. It was a public declaration of his infidelity, a smug display of his power. He believed he was untouchable, that his wealth and status were a shield that made him invulnerable to consequences. His texts started coming in a steady stream, a pathetic attempt at damage control. Liv just landed back in NY. Meeting was a killer. I'm exhausted. Heading straight to the office. So much to catch up on. Can't wait to see you tonight. I've missed you. Each message was a fresh twist of the knife. She didn't reply. Her silence was a new and unfamiliar weapon, and she wielded it with a chilling precision. Let him wonder. Let him sweat. For the first time in their relationship, she had the upper hand, and she had no intention of relinquishing it. That afternoon, the doorbell chimed a sharp, intrusive sound that shattered the funereal silence. It was Maya, her best friend, since their college days, a fiery, no-nonsense lawyer with a bullshit detector that was second to none. She took one look at Olivia's pale, tear-streaked face and enveloped her in a hug that was fierce and protective. I saw it. Maya said, her voice laced with a venom that was strangely comforting. That scumbag. That narcissistic, fame-hungry pig. I swear, Olivia, I will personally key his precious Bugatti. Olivia let out a choked laugh that was half a sob. Don't bother. It's probably a lease. Maya pulled back her sharp, intelligent eyes, scanning Olivia's face. What are you going to do? I don't know, Olivia whispered the confession, a painful admission of her own helplessness. He owns everything. This apartment, the cars, the bank accounts. I'm a librarian, Maya. I have a savings account with $3,000 in it. You have more than that, Maya said, her voice firm. You have a prenuptial agreement. I read every single word of that document before I let you sign it. It's ironclad. He might be a bastard, but his lawyers are meticulous. There's an infidelity clause. A big one. The prenup. Olivia had almost forgotten about it. At the time, it had seemed like a cold, cynical document, a jarring intrusion into their fairy tale romance. Richard had dismissed it as a mere formality, a piece of paper for the bean counters. Now it was her only life raft in a sea of uncertainty. But I'll have to prove it. Olivia said, the practicalities of the situation crashing down on her. He'll deny it. He'll say the picture is old, that it's photoshopped. He'll hire the best lawyers in the city to paint me as a hysterical gold-digging wife. Let him try, Maya said, a predatory glint in her eye. Public opinion is a powerful thing, Liv. And right now, public opinion is not on his side. She pulled out her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. She brought up the gossip site, the comments section, a raging dumpster fire of public outrage, while his pregnant wife is at home. What a pig, Khloe Vanderbilt is a notorious home wrecker. No surprise there. I hope his wife takes him to the cleaners. The comments were a balm to her wounded soul. She wasn't alone. The world saw him for what he was. But it wasn't enough. A few nasty comments on a gossip blog wouldn't bring down a man like Richard Sterling. He would weather the storm, release a carefully crafted PR statement, and in a few weeks the world would move on to the next scandal. I need more than just a picture, Maya. Olivia said, her voice growing stronger, a new and unfamiliar resolve taking root in the ashes of her heartbreak. I need something he can't deny, something that will ruin him. Maya looked at her, a slow, admiring smile spreading across her face. There's the Olivia I know, the one who aced her thesis on investigative journalism. You've been playing the part of the dutiful wife for so long, I think you forgot who you really are. It was true. She had submerged her own identity in her own ambitions and passions, taking a back seat to his all-consuming career. She had become an extension of him, a beautifully dressed accessory on his arm, and in doing so she had given him all the power. No more. His entire life is a lie. Maya. Olivia said, her mind racing the pieces of a puzzle she hadn't even realized she was solving starting to click into place. The charity work for his foundation, the ethical sourcing of his building materials, the carefully cultivated image of a self-made man. It's all a facade. I've seen things. I've overheard conversations. I never put it all together. She thought of the late-night meetings with men in expensive suits who looked more like gangsters than businessmen. The hushed, cryptic phone calls about zoning variances and political donations. The second set of accounting books she'd accidentally stumbled upon in his home office, which he'd quickly explained away as creative tax strategies. At the time, she had chosen to believe him to turn a blind eye to the darkness that lurked beneath the glittering surface of their life. Now she saw it all with a terrifying clarity. He's not just a cheater, Maya. Olivia said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. He's a crook, and I'm going to expose him for what he really is. The decision once made was like a shot of adrenaline. The grief was still there, a dull, throbbing ache in her chest. But it was now overlaid with a new and exhilarating sense of purpose. She was no longer a victim. She was a woman on a mission. That evening, when Richard finally came home, he found her sitting in the living room, bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp. She looked calm, composed, almost serene. He, on the other hand, was a mess. His tie was loosened, his hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Liv. He began, his voice thick with a carefully rehearsed contrition. I am so sorry. I know I messed up. The meeting. It was a nightmare. I should have been there. I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you. She looked at him, her gaze cool and steady. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply held up her phone, the picture of him and Khloe displayed on the screen. The color drained from his face. He stared at the image, his jaw working for a long, silent moment. The mask of the charming, devoted husband slipped, and for the first time, she saw the real Richard Sterling. He was cold, calculating, and utterly ruthless. "You should have been more careful," she said, her voice as calm and quiet as the eye of a hurricane. "Social media is a tricky thing." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Don't be naive, Olivia. You think a silly picture is going to hurt me. I'll have my PR team issue a statement. We'll say it was a business trip, that Khloe is a client. It will all blow over." "I'm sure it will," she said, standing up, the movement fluid and graceful. She walked to the window, her back to him, and looked out at the city that he believed he owned. "But this isn't about the picture, Richard. This is about everything else." He frowned, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" She turned to face him, a small, enigmatic smile playing on her lips. "You really should be more careful about the things you leave lying around your office. Zoning variances, political donations, creative tax strategies. It's all so fascinating." The blood drained from his face. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years, and in her eyes he didn't see the quiet, adoring wife he had married. He saw a stranger, a formidable, intelligent, and very, very angry stranger. "What have you done?" he whispered, his voice hoarse, with a dawning, horrified realization. "Nothing yet," she said, her smile widening. "But the night is young, and I have a feeling tomorrow's headlines are going to be very, very interesting." The penthouse, once a symbol of her gilded cage, transformed into Olivia's strategic command center. The initial dizzying rush of defiance had settled into a cold, calculated resolve. She was no longer just a scorned wife. She was an intelligence operative deep in enemy territory. Every creak of the floorboards, every chime of the elevator sent a jolt of adrenaline through her veins. Richard was home less and less consumed with what he called damage control for the St. Bart's photo, a firestorm that his PR team was struggling to extinguish. This gave Olivia the time she needed. With Maya acting as her handler on the outside, they began to map out their strategy. "He's arrogant," Maya had said during one of their encrypted calls, "and arrogant men get sloppy. He won't believe you have the guts or the intelligence to actually do anything. Use that." Olivia did. She played the part of the wounded, withdrawn wife to perfection. She was quiet, tearful, and seemingly broken. When Richard was home, she would flinch from his touch, her silence a constant passive-aggressive rebuke that fed his ego. He saw her as defeated, which was precisely what she wanted. Her first target was his home office. It was his sanctuary, a sleek, minimalist space with floor-to-ceiling windows and a desk carved from a single piece of obsidian. It was where he held his most secret meetings and took his most cryptic calls. She had a key, of course, but he'd recently installed a new state-of-the-art security system with a keypad. For days, she watched him, her mind a sponge absorbing every detail. She noticed he would often tap his fingers on the table when he was thinking a nervous, rhythmic pattern. One evening, as he was distracted by a furious phone call with his publicist, she watched from the doorway as he absently tapped out the code on the desk before entering it into the keypad. It was a sequence of 8 digits, the date of his first major real estate acquisition. It was so perfectly, narcissistically him. The next day, as soon as he left for the office, she was inside. The room smelled of him, expensive cologne and an undercurrent of metallic tension. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she began her search. She wasn't looking for paper. Richard was too smart for that. Everything was digital, protected by layers of encryption. Her librarian skills, once a source of gentle mockery for Richard's high-flying friends, were now her sharpest weapon. She knew how to find information, how to see patterns in chaos. She remembered stumbling upon a strange-looking external hard drive a few months ago, tucked away in a drawer of his antique Globe bar. He had snatched it from her, his reaction unusually sharp, saying it was a backup of old family photos. It was the only time he had ever seemed genuinely rattled by her presence in his office. It was still there, nestled between a bottle of 25-year-old Macallan and a set of crystal tumblers. It was a sleek silver rectangle, no bigger than a deck of cards. Plugging it into his desktop, she was met with a password prompt. She tried the usuals: his birthday, her birthday, their anniversary, the name of his first company. Nothing. Frustration gnawed at her. She sat in his leather chair, the silence of the apartment pressing in on her. What was the one thing he loved more than his money, more than his own reflection, his legacy, the narrative he had so carefully constructed? She thought back to their first date, how he had spoken with such passion about the Sterling Tower, the gleaming skyscraper that was his crowning achievement. He had called it his true north. She typed the words into the password field, True North 212. The drive unlocked. It was a labyrinth of folders and subfolders, a digital maze of shell corporations, offshore accounts and encrypted ledgers. It was the second set of books she had glimpsed, but on a scale she could never have imagined. This wasn't just creative tax strategy. This was a massive, sophisticated web of fraud, bribery, and money laundering. Millions of dollars siphoned from company accounts, moved through a series of untraceable transactions, and funneled into the pockets of city officials, zoning board members, and union bosses. She found a folder labeled Project Nightingale. Inside was a detailed accounting of payments made to a shell corporation, which in turn had made a series of political donations to Councilman Robert Jennings, a man who had been instrumental in pushing through the zoning changes for Richard's latest luxury development. It was a clear, undeniable case of bribery. Her hands trembled as she copied the files onto a new encrypted thumb drive she had purchased with cash. This was it. This was more than just a messy divorce. This was a federal crime. But as she was about to eject the drive, a different folder caught her eye. It was labeled Khloe. Her breath hitched. Against her better judgment, she clicked it open. It wasn't love letters or romantic photos. It was a series of wire transfers, monthly payments of $50,000 sent to Khloe Vanderbilt for the past 2 years. The memo on each transfer was the same consulting fee. And then she saw the contract, a non-disclosure agreement signed by Khloe that essentially paid her to be Richard's public girlfriend. The contract stipulated a certain number of public appearances, a steady stream of social media posts, and absolute discretion about the true nature of their arrangement. It was a business transaction. Even his affair was a carefully managed illusion. The realization didn't lessen the pain, but it sharpened her anger into a diamond-hard point. He hadn't just betrayed her. He had cheapened the very idea of love and affection, reducing it to another line item on his balance sheet. As she was absorbing this new, sickening revelation, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. The chime of the private elevator. He was back. Her mind raced. She couldn't be found here. Not now. She hastily ejected the thumb drive, shoved it into her pocket, and tried to close the folders, but her fumbling fingers betrayed her. The Khloe folder was still open on the screen. She shut down the computer, praying it would be fast enough. The sound of his key in the front door was a death knell. She slipped out of the office, closing the door silently behind her, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was halfway down the hall when he walked in, his face a thunderous mask. "What were you doing?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. I was looking for a book," she stammered, her mind seizing on the first plausible lie. "I thought I left one in there." His eyes, cold and assessing, swept over her, then flickered towards the office door. He walked past her into the room she had just vacated. She stood frozen in the hallway, every muscle tensed. She heard the soft whir of the computer booting up, a silence that stretched for an eternity. When he emerged, his face was unreadable. He looked at her, a long, searching gaze that seemed to peel back the layers of her deception. She braced herself for the explosion, for the accusations, for the end of the charade. But instead he smiled. It was a slow, chilling smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Find your book," he asked, his voice smooth as silk. "No," she whispered. It wasn't there. "Too bad," he said, walking towards her. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his touch unexpectedly gentle. "You look tired, Liv. Why don't you go lie down? I'll have dinner sent up." It was a dismissal, a threat wrapped in a velvet glove. He knew, or he suspected, and he was letting her know that he was watching. The game had changed. He was no longer underestimating her. He was hunting her. As she walked to their bedroom on unsteady legs, the encrypted thumb drive in her pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She had the ammunition she needed to destroy him. But now it was a race against time. She had to get it to someone who could use it before he found a way to silence her for good. The air in the penthouse had become thin and sharp, each breath a calculated risk. Richard's feigned gentleness was far more terrifying than any overt rage. He moved around the apartment with a predatory grace, his eyes constantly following her. He would ask casual questions about her day, about her phone calls, about her conversations with Maya. It was a subtle psychological water torture designed to make her break. She knew her digital footprint was being monitored, her phone likely bugged. The game had escalated, and she was running out of moves. "You can't do this alone anymore," Maya insisted, during a hushed meeting in a noisy coffee shop, a place so public and mundane she hoped it was safe. "You need to get that drive to a professional, someone he can't buy or intimidate." There was only one name that came to mind: Thea Gallo. Gallo was a legend, an old-school investigative journalist with a Pulitzer Prize and a reputation for being a bulldog. She had taken down corrupt senators, exposed corporate malfeasance at the highest levels, and was famously immune to the charms and threats of powerful men. Her column in the New York Chronicle was a weekly dose of righteous fury that struck fear into the hearts of the city's elite. Richard hated her. He had once called her a bitter, sanctimonious harpy after she'd written a scathing piece about the tax breaks given to his company. Contacting her was the next challenge. Olivia couldn't use her own phone or email. She went to a public library, a place that felt like a return to a former, safer self, and used a computer to create an anonymous email address. Her message was brief and cryptic. Subject Project Nightingale. I have information about Richard Sterling, information he would kill to keep quiet. If you want the biggest story of your career, meet me. Friday, 4 p.m. The Folly. The Folly was a forgotten, graffiti-covered ruin in Central Park, a decorative structure from the 19th century that was now little more than a curiosity for tourists. It was open public, yet offered enough secluded corners to have a conversation without being easily seen. She signed the email Cassandra. The Trojan princess cursed to speak the truth but never be believed. It felt fitting. The 2 days leading up to the meeting were the longest of her life. She felt Richard's suspicion like a physical weight, his presence a constant, suffocating pressure. He suggested they go away for the weekend to their house in the Hamptons. Just the two of us, he'd said, his voice laced with a meaning that made her skin crawl. We need to reconnect. She made an excuse a checkup with Dr. Evans she couldn't possibly miss. The lie felt flimsy, and she saw a flicker of cold anger in his eyes before he masked it with a sigh of disappointment. On Friday, she dressed in the most anonymous clothes she owned: jeans, a nondescript grey hoodie, and a baseball cap pulled low over her face. She took a meandering route to the park, switching subway trains 3 times, paying with cash. She felt like a character in a spy novel, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Thea Gallo was already there. She was smaller than Olivia had imagined, with a shock of unruly salt and pepper hair, and eyes that were sharp and intelligent, missing nothing. She was leaning against a stone archway, pretending to read a book. But Olivia could see her gaze sweeping the area, cataloguing every person who walked by. Cassandra Thea asked, her voice a low, gravelly rasp, not even looking up from her book as Olivia approached. Yes. You've got 5 minutes to convince me this isn't a waste of my time. Olivia's hands trembled as she pulled the thumb drive from her pocket. It's all on here, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Everything. The shell corporations, the offshore accounts, the ledgers for Project Nightingale. He has Councilman Jennings in his pocket. It's all documented. Thea finally looked at her, her gaze sharp and appraising. She didn't take the drive. A lot of people make accusations against Richard Sterling. He's a rich, powerful man. It comes with the territory. Why should I believe you because I'm his wife? The words hung in the air between them. Thea's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She studied Olivia's face, seeing past the hoodie and the fear to the desperate resolve beneath. Why Thea asked the single word encompassing a universe of questions. Why now? Why turn on him? What's in it for you? Olivia's hand went to her stomach, a gesture that was both protective and defiant. He missed our baby's first ultrasound to be with his mistress in St. Bart's, she said, her voice cracking with a raw, undeniable pain. He thinks I'm just a quiet, stupid accessory he can discard when he's bored. He's about to find out how wrong he is. It was the detail that sealed it. Not the financial data, but the human story. The betrayal. Thea Gallo knew that the best stories weren't about numbers. They were about hubris, and Richard Sterling's hubris was about to be his downfall. She held out her hand. Give it to me. Olivia placed the drive in her palm. The transfer of power was immediate. The weight on her shoulders lifted, replaced by a terrifying, exhilarating sense of inevitability. She had lit the fuse. Now all she could do was wait for the explosion. Go home, Thea said, her voice softening slightly. Act normal. Say nothing. Don't contact me again. I'll find you if I need you. And Olivia. Olivia turned. Be careful. The first article dropped 4 days later. It was the front-page story of the Chronicle above the fold. The headline was a masterpiece of journalistic aggression, Sterling's shadow empire. A trail of bribes, shell companies, and betrayed trust. The article didn't mention Olivia. It didn't mention Khloe Vanderbilt or the trip to St. Bart's. It was a cold, surgical dissection of Richard's business practices. Thea laid out the evidence with meticulous precision, detailing the creation of the Shell Corporation, the suspicious timing of the political donations to Councilman Jennings, and the subsequent favorable zoning decisions that had netted Sterling's company hundreds of millions of dollars. She didn't publish the documents themselves that would be her next move, but she described their contents in such detail that it was clear her source was impeccable. Olivia was in the kitchen making tea when Richard came storming in, his face purple with rage. He was holding a copy of the paper, his knuckles white as he gripped it. "Did you see this trash?" he roared, slamming the paper down on the marble island. "That vindictive witch. She's been trying to come after me for years. Someone is feeding her lies." Lies. He was looking at her, his eyes boring into her, searching for any flicker of guilt, any sign of triumph. She met his gaze with a carefully constructed mask of wide-eyed concern. "My God, Richard," she said, her voice trembling slightly. That's horrible. Who would do such a thing?" He stared at her for a long moment, the silence stretching into an unbearable tension. She could see the gears turning in his mind, the paranoia warring with his ingrained belief in her meekness. He wanted to believe she was incapable of such a calculated betrayal. His ego demanded it. Finally, he seemed to make a decision. He let out a long, weary breath, the rage seeming to drain out of him, replaced by a practiced performance of a man under siege. "I don't know," he said, slumping into a chair. "But I'm going to find out. And when I do, I am going to destroy them." He looked up at her, his eyes pleading. "I need you by my side for this, Liv. We have to present a united front, you and me against the world, just like we always planned." He reached for her hand. His touch was like ice. "Of course, darling," she said, forcing a smile as she allowed him to pull her closer. "Whatever you need." As she stood there, his arm around her, the smell of his fury and fear filling the air, she felt a cold, terrifying certainty. This was just the beginning. The story was out. The storm had broken, and they were standing directly in its path. Thea Gallo's article was not a bomb. It was a contagion. It spread through the city's financial and political ecosystems with terrifying speed, infecting every aspect of Richard's life. The first 48 hours were a whirlwind of frantic phone calls, cancelled meetings, and the palpable chill of his powerful friends suddenly becoming unavailable. The Sterling brand, once synonymous with luxury and success, was now tainted by the whiff of corruption. Richard, true to form, came out swinging. He convened a press conference in the lobby of Sterling Tower, a marble and glass cathedral to his own ego. Standing before a wall of cameras, with Olivia positioned slightly behind him, as the supportive stoic wife, he was a masterclass in controlled indignation. "These are baseless smears," he thundered, his voice resonating with rehearsed outrage. "The work of a journalist with a personal vendetta and a cowardly anonymous source who is feeding her lies. My business dealings are an open book. My success was earned through hard work and innovation, not by cutting corners or breaking laws. We will be pursuing every available legal option against the New York Chronicle for this malicious and defamatory attack." Olivia played her part, her expression a perfect blend of concern for her husband and dignified defiance. Inside, she was a roiling sea of anxiety and a grim, burgeoning satisfaction. She watched him lie to the world, to the battery of reporters, and felt not a shred of her former love, only a profound and chilling alienation. The man she had married had never really existed. He was a performance, and this was his grandest, most desperate one yet. But the performance wasn't working. Thea Gallo was too respected, her reporting too meticulous. The story had legs. The district attorney's office issued a terse no comment when asked if they were looking into the allegations, a phrase that in political parlance meant, yes, absolutely. Investors in his new development project began to get nervous. A Japanese consortium, which had been poised to inject $500 million into the deal, announced they were postponing their decision, pending further review. The stock price of Sterling Enterprises, his publicly traded parent company, dipped 5%, then 10%. The pressure began to fray Richard at the edges. The mask of the confident tycoon would slip, revealing the snarling, paranoid man beneath. The penthouse, once a quiet sanctuary, became a pressure cooker. He would pace for hours, phone fused to his ear, alternating between barking orders at his legal team and trying to soothe the nerves of his dwindling allies. His suspicion of Olivia was a constant, unspoken hum beneath the surface of their interactions. He had his security team sweep the apartment for bugs, a move he explained as standard procedure given the circumstances. He bought her a new phone, a present, he said, but she knew it was a tracking device, a way to monitor her every communication. She used it only for mundane conversations, continuing to communicate with Maya through a cheap burner phone she kept hidden in a box of tampons, the one place she knew he would never look. Then came the Khloe problem. The influencer, who had built a career on being aspirational and carefree, was not equipped for this kind of crisis. The comments on her Instagram feed had turned vicious. She was no longer just a home wrecker. She was now associated with a brewing criminal scandal. Her sponsors began to pull out. A lucrative contract with a high-end tequila brand was suddenly under review. Khloe panicked. She started calling Richard constantly, her voice a shrill, hysterical whine that Olivia could hear even from the next room. "You have to fix this, Richie," she'd shrieked during one call Olivia overheard. "My reputation is ruined. That journalist is going to start digging into me next. I just know it. Our contract says you're supposed to handle this stuff." Their business arrangement was crumbling under the pressure. Khloe, the carefully curated asset, had become a massive liability. After one particularly nasty, hour-long phone call, Richard smashed a Lalique vase against the wall, the sound of shattering crystal echoing the state of his life. He turned to Olivia, his eyes wild. "Do you see what they're doing to us?" "To our family," he demanded, as if she were a co-conspirator in his own defense. It was in that moment that Olivia decided to twist the knife. "Maybe you should just pay her more," she said, her voice deceptively gentle. She was arranging a bouquet of fresh lilies, her movements calm and deliberate. Richard froze. "What did you say?" Khloe Olivia said, not looking at him. "It's clearly a business arrangement. You have a contract after all. Maybe you just need to renegotiate her consulting fee to include hazard pay." The blood drained from his face. It was a direct hit. The one piece of information he couldn't fathom how she would know. He had been so careful with that folder, so certain of his digital security. The look in his eyes was no longer mere suspicion. It was a cold, terrifying certainty. "How do you know about that?" he whispered, his voice shaking with a rage that was far more potent than his earlier theatrics. Olivia finally looked up, meeting his gaze with a cool, level stare. "You're a terrible liar, Richard. And you're sloppy. You leave things open on your computer." The charade was over. The unspoken war was now declared. "You," he seethed, taking a step towards her. "This was you. You went to Gallo." "Prove it," she said, her voice steady, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. He stalked towards her, his face a mask of fury, his hands clenched into fists. For a terrifying second, she thought he was going to hit her. She stood her ground, her chin held high, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. His eyes followed the movement, and he stopped, his chest heaving. The baby, her silent, unknowing protector. "I am going to ruin you," he hissed, his voice a low, venomous promise. "When this is over, you will have nothing. No money, no friends. People will see you for the vindictive, gold-digging snake you are. I will make sure of it." "You can't ruin me, Richard," she said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Because I was never one of your assets, and you are about to learn what happens when you write off a liability that knows all your secrets." He stared at her, breathing heavily, the hatred in his eyes a palpable force. The battle lines were drawn. It was no longer about money or infidelity. It was a primal struggle for survival. He would use all his power, all his wealth and influence to crush her. But she had the one thing he didn't: the truth. And she had given it to a woman who was about to publish her second installment. The fallout was just beginning. The week after their confrontation was a new kind of hell. The penthouse was no longer a home, but a battlefield, thick with the silence of unspoken threats. Richard had his lawyers draft a public statement for Olivia to sign a declaration of her unwavering belief in his innocence. She refused. Her defiance sent him into a silent, simmering rage that was more unnerving than any of his shouted tirades. He had her followed. A sleek black town car would be parked across the street whenever she left the building. He was trying to intimidate her, to isolate her, to box her in. Meanwhile, Thea Gallo's second article hit the newsstands. This one was even more devastating than the first. The headline was stark: "The Sterling Ledgers. A how-to guide for bribing public officials." Thea, using the information from the thumb drive, published redacted snippets of the financial records from the Project Nightingale folder. She detailed the exact dates and amounts of the wire transfers from Sterling Enterprises to the Shell Company, and from the Shell Company to Councilman Jennings' campaign fund. It was a smoking gun, a clear and undeniable map of corruption. The story ignited a political firestorm. Councilman Jennings held a disastrous press conference where he sweated profusely and denied everything, looking guiltier with every word. The mayor, a longtime ally of Richard's, was forced to call for an independent investigation. The sharks were circling. Olivia watched it all unfold from her gilded prison, a strange mix of terror and triumph churning in her gut. She had set this in motion, but the story now had a life of its own, a powerful momentum she couldn't control. The breakthrough came from a place she hadn't expected. In a quiet suburb in New Jersey, a man named Frank Miller read Thea Gallo's latest article, his morning coffee growing cold in his hands. Frank was Sterling Enterprises' former chief financial officer. He was a quiet, meticulous accountant who had worked for Richard for 15 years. A year ago, Frank had discovered the Project Nightingale discrepancies. He had gone to Richard naively believing his boss would be horrified that it must be some kind of mistake. Richard had fired him on the spot. He'd had him sign an ironclad NDA in exchange for a meager severance package and threatened to ruin his reputation in the industry if he ever spoke a word. Frank, a man with a mortgage and 2 kids in college, had been terrified into silence. But seeing Thea's article, seeing the very secrets he had been forced to keep, laid bare for the world to see, sparked a flicker of courage in his long-dormant conscience. He knew he had something even more valuable than the ledgers Thea had published. He had the recordings. Richard, in his arrogance, had a habit of recording his meetings. He called it keeping an accurate record. Frank knew it was for blackmail purposes. For his own protection, Frank had made a copy of one specific recording before he was fired, the meeting where Richard and Councilman Jennings explicitly discussed the quid pro quo arrangement. The zoning variance in exchange for a series of offshore payments. It was the one piece of evidence that could send them both to prison. After a week of agonizing of sleepless nights and hushed, fearful conversations with his wife, Frank Miller made a decision. He found Thea Gallo's contact information and sent her a one-line email. "I have the rest of your story." Thea, sensing the magnitude of the moment, arranged to meet him immediately. The recording was everything she had hoped for, and more. The audio quality was crystal clear. Richard's voice, smug and self-assured, laying out the terms of the bribe. Jennings's greedy, eager acceptance. It was the nail in the coffin. Richard, however, was not a man to go down without a fight. He was bleeding money, his allies were abandoning him in droves, and the DA was impaneling a grand jury. He was desperate, and his desperation made him reckless. Through his own network of private investigators, he found out that Thea had been in contact with a disgraced former CFO. He put 2 and 2 together, and realized Frank Miller was about to betray him. He decided to take matters into his own hands. He drove out to Frank's suburban home himself. No lawyers, no security. He thought he could intimidate his former employee back into silence the way he always had. He offered Frank money, a lot of it, to disappear, to deny everything. When Frank refused his newfound courage holding firm, Richard's temper snapped. The argument spilled out onto the front lawn. "You are nothing!" Richard screamed, his face contorted with rage, completely oblivious to the neighbor across the street who was filming the entire exchange on her phone. "I made you, and I will destroy you. I will ruin your family." The threat, crude and desperate, was a critical error. The neighbor who had already been following the Sterling scandal in the news immediately sent the video to the local TV station. By that evening, the footage was everywhere. Richard Sterling, the sophisticated billionaire, was exposed as a common thug, threatening a scared, middle-aged man on his own front lawn. It shattered the last remnants of his public image. It was ugly, it was raw, and it was undeniable. Back in the penthouse, Olivia watched the news report, her hand covering her mouth in shock. This was beyond anything she could have orchestrated. Richard's own hubris, his own uncontrollable rage, was proving to be his most effective enemy. The phone rang. It was Maya. "It's over, Liv," she said, her voice awestruck. He just handed the prosecution a witness tampering charge on a silver platter. He's done. Later that night, the doorbell rang. It wasn't Richard. It was 2 detectives from the NYPD. They were polite, professional, and deeply uncomfortable. "Mrs. Sterling," one of them began, "we have a warrant for your husband's arrest. We have reason to believe he may be here." Olivia stood in the doorway of the life that was now collapsing around her. She had a choice. She could have told them he wasn't there, bought him a few more hours of freedom. But she thought of the ultrasound, of the cold clinical room, of the lie about Dubai, of the casual cruelty in his eyes when he realized she knew. She looked past the detectives down the long marble hallway towards the master bedroom, where she knew he was hiding, making frantic phone calls to lawyers who were no longer answering. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and steady. "He's here. Please come in." The arrest was a quiet, humiliating affair. There was no dramatic chase, just the surreal sight of Richard Sterling, his face slack with shock, being led out of his own penthouse in handcuffs. The click of the cuffs was the punctuation mark at the end of their marriage. In the days that followed, Richard's empire imploded. The recording from Frank Miller and the witness tampering video created an open and shut case. His allies vanished, and his company fell apart. Thayer Gallo's final article was less an exposé and more a eulogy for a fallen titan, noting that Richard's greatest liability was his inability to see the value in the people he considered his assets, guided by Maya Olivia, filed for divorce. The infidelity clause bolstered by the St. Bart's photo and Khloe Vanderbilt's tell-all interview made the proceedings swift. Richard, facing decades in prison, signed the papers from a holding cell. Olivia took what the prenup stipulated, a fortune she didn't want for herself. She sold the penthouse, erasing every trace of him to scrub clean the gilded cage. 6 months later, Olivia was living in a sun-drenched Brooklyn brownstone. The proceeds from the sale were in a trust for her daughter Lily, and funded a new foundation she started to provide legal aid to women in abusive relationships. She returned to work at the library, not for the money, but for the peace it brought her. One afternoon, while rocking her 1-month-old daughter, a news alert popped up on her phone. It was the headline she had been waiting for. Sterling sentenced to 20 years. Judge cites staggering arrogance. She read that his downfall was traced back to a single ill-advised beach selfie. Looking at Lily sleeping in her arms, Olivia whispered, "He thought he was the star of the show, but he was just the villain in our story. And we get to write the happy ending." The story of Richard Sterling was over. Hers was just beginning. She was no longer a wife or a victim, but a mother, a philanthropist, and a survivor who had turned his ugliest secrets into a force for good. He wanted a headline, and she had given him exactly what he deserved. And there you have it, a story of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate triumph. Olivia's journey shows us that sometimes the greatest strength is found in our most painful moments. It's a reminder that no one is untouchable, and that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of coming to light.